harika bir panel sizi bekliyor. Gerçekten duayen isimlerden olan Otto Scharmer'ı dinleyeceğiz şimdi. Shirin Paizen ona eşlik edecek. 21. yüzyılda kurumların rolü ne olacak konusunu ele alacaklar birlikte. Presensing Enstitüsü kurucusu Otto Scharmer, kuruluşların sistemsel dönüşümdeki rolünü masaya yatıracak. 21. yüzyılda kuruluşların rolleri şu sorular üzerinden tartışılacak. Kamu kuruluşlarından üniversitelere, iş dünyasından sivil topluma, farklı sektörlerdeki tüm kuruluşlar gezegenimiz ve toplumlarımızın ihtiyaç duyduğu sistemsel dönüşümü tetikleyen ve yöneten mekanizmalara nasıl dönüşebilirler? O mekanizmaları kendilerine nasıl katabilirler değil, bizatihi o mekanizmaları nasıl kendileri olabilirler diye soracağız ve kuruluşların misyonları ve yönetim tarzları yeniden nasıl tanımlanabilir? Çok zor sorular belki de değil. Biraz açık zihinlerle, açık kalplerle dinlemeye davet ediyorum sizleri. Evet sevgili Shirin Paizen, sizdeyiz.
Çok teşekkür ederim girişiniz için. And hello to everybody who is joining us right now this afternoon. It's Friday afternoon. I know it's kind of the beginning of the weekend and the end of the week, but still we have so many important things to discuss. So please, very warm welcome to our dear speaker and guest, Mr. Otto Scharmer.
Thank you so very much for having me on, Shirin.
Thank you, Otto. And okay, so let's begin very quickly, if we may. I want to let you the virtual floor to you. Please, you can just go and start your presentations. Then I will have some further questions to evaluate what you are ready to explain to us.
Thank you so much. Let me begin with just sharing my appreciation of the panel that I was just able to listen into. So I think what I heard Luisa saying, kind of the next Buddha may be a sangha, so a community, and also Richard talking about the polarities between doing and being that we all know very well. That really is also at the core of the work we do at the Presencing Institute, and in a way, kind of so the process that we are working with, so that often is referred to as the U process, is a process that is moving through these stages, that we need to kind of connect with each other on a more deeper level in order to access collective creativity, kind of that we can then put to work on the challenges that we face. The question that was put to me from my remarks before we move into the conversation was, what would the role of institutions in the 21st century look like? And I would say, well, the role of institutions in the 21st century should be one that is relevant to the challenges that we face. I think that's really the common ground. I would like to just share a few images around that. So let me just try to move. Can you see the slide, an iceberg slide? What you see here is basically, and that's the background from me looking at this situation and answering the question you posed to me. The perspective I'm taking on that is really systems thinking. And you all know, have seen an image like that many times, kind of the iceberg model. And systems thinking really starts with a very simple distinction, which is symptoms at the top and root issues below the waterline. So what are the key challenges that we face right now? And I would say one way of describing them is in terms of the three divides you see at the top here. The social divide, like polarization and inequity, so that was discussed in the earlier panel. Of course, the ecological divide, kind of climate, the planetary emergency, really, we are facing right now. And then the spiritual divide that was also mentioned, I think, by Todd and others in terms of the mental health and kind of epidemic of loneliness. And you all have seen this many times, the 17 SDGs, and they really align to these three categories, right? The first 10 SDGs really linking to the social divide, spelling that dimension out. The next 5 really spelling out some key dimensions of the ecological divide. And you could say the last 2, SDG 16, 17, really focusing on or addressing the deeper foundations based on which we build community and based on which we build society. So from where I am, the essence of systems thinking can be really summarized in 3 main principles, which is, so I'm an action researcher. I have done like participated in change initiatives for the past 20 plus years. And this is, if you want, my takeaway. Number one, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So that means you cannot change the system unless you address all four of these levels, right? Yes, sometimes you need to address the symptoms, but also you need to address what's below the waterline, the structures, the paradigms of thought, and the deeper sources of our energy, of our commitment, and of who we are, right? Remember in the earlier panel, kind of the conversation around identity. You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. You cannot change unless you look into the mirror, right? We know that from the interpersonal, but we also need to apply that to the system level. Number three, you can't lead a system unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. So in other words, you cannot be an entrepreneur, you cannot be a social entrepreneur, you cannot be a change maker or a leader unless you can feel the future, sense, and then sense the future, and then operate in the now from that sense of connection, right? Embodying the future now. That's really the heart of, I would say, what true entrepreneurship and true social entrepreneurship has always been. So in other words, it's moving from a mindset that is looking at reality like this. So I'm the observer here on one side of the telescope, and reality, the system, is out there on the other side of the telescope, to another paradigm of attention in which I begin to see myself as part of the system. So when we move from here to here, what do we, as an individual, what do we call it? We call it mindfulness. It's about paying attention to our attention. When we move from here to here as a team in a conversation, what do we call it? It's a move from debate to dialogue. Dialogue is not just people talking to each other. Dialogue is the capacity of a system to see itself. And that's really what I think the essence of systems thinking is. So when I listen to a lot of change makers in the real world, I came across this quote kind of when talking to the late CEO of Hanover Insurance, Bill O'Brien, who summarized his experience of leading transformational change with this line: "The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener." So that means the success of what I do as a leader depends on the inner place from that I operate. What is that inner place? And I found that kind of the inner place essentially has to do with these three inner instruments of knowing: the open mind, the open heart, the open will. By which I mean open mind, curiosity, it's the capacity to suspend our old habits of judgment. What is open heart or compassion? It is our capacity to empathize, to look at a problem through the eyes of another, right? Not through our own silo. And what is essentially open will is the capacity to let go and let come. That essentially, I think, is the leader's inner work today. Yet what we see when we look around us is a huge amplification of what? The opposite, right? It's a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka amplification of doubt, hate, and fear. And I don't need to spell that out because we have seen that story playing out the past 5+ years in many different formats, right? So one of them here in the United States. So let me end with systems thinking and systems change and institutions. So what really is the essence of systems change? And I would liken that with what we do with our smartphones, right? There are two things we can do with the smartphone. We can load a new app, or we can upgrade the operating system. And I think systems change is about the latter. And this is kind of one way. So I think in all systems today, we move from 1.0, 2.0 to 3.0, 4.0. From input and authority centric to output and efficiency centric to outcome and user centric to co-creative and ecosystem-centric. So when you take learning and health, traditional and teacher or doctor-centric, right? That's the old system. The current system is evidence-based medicine, teaching, testing-based teaching, right? AKA bulimia learning, fast in, fast out, which is the absence of real learning. So what is the good school, the good health system? It's 3.0. Patient-centric medicine, reorganizing healthcare systems around the patient journey. And then, of course, learner-centric schools, organizing the learning process around the learning journey of the student. Is that the future? I don't think so. Or maybe it's just a part. I think the future has to do with moving on the health system from just addressing issues of health towards strengthening the sources of well-being. And in terms of learning, moving from head-centric learning to activating the deep learning cycle, which includes all three head, heart, and hand. Farm and food, the same thing. Traditional, current industrial agriculture, right? The source of half of all our environmental problems. Organic agriculture, better because it's reducing negative footprint. But is it the future? I don't think so. The future will be food as medium for healing planet and people. And then corporate social responsibility, right? Mentioned before. 1.0, just PR. 2.0, efficiency, like energy efficiency and so on. 3.0, now it's a source for business innovation, right? I move from combustion engine to an electric car, for example. But is that the future already? No, because the future would be reinventing mobility. So that's where kind of we are beginning to focus on transforming the systems that are relevant for the SDGs that I mentioned before. Anchor, so finance, right? From traditional extractive capital, aka Wall Street, right? Externality blind. Impact investing, that's good. But is it the future? I don't think so, because it's just focusing on single variables often, right? So I think what we need to do is to move from there, relinking capital with the regeneration of our commons, right? So transforming these ecosystems in a way that allows us to bridge the three divides. And all of that, of course, is embedded in governance, from traditional visible hand, invisible hand, to organized interest groups. Very often today, it's those three that define current governance. But in the future, I think we have to go to awareness-based collective action, by which I mean bringing together all the stakeholders and moving them into a collective sense-making and co-creative process, as it was discussed before, and as it needs to be done, right, in specific places and regions in context-specific way. What does that look like? So it looks like a lot of listening. So this is the top 30 of Ant Financial, one of the biggest fintech in the world, spending a week in listening to the entire ecosystem of their partners. So mapping in a country, everyone from the regulators to their partners to the unbanked people in the countries they are working, and listening to all of them and beginning to see your own system through the eyes of the entire ecosystem that you're working with. This is pretty much the same process, but in a multi-sector process, focusing on food deserts in Sao Paulo, 30 different organizations in a process of sense-making and looking at the key issue of food deserts from all the different relevant experiences, and then unlocking through that collective action. And this is pretty much the same process, modeling, mapping the whole system. But what you see here, that's one of the biggest multi-stakeholder projects. What you see here, for example, this gentleman, he's the head of biggest public bank in Indonesia. Not the head of HR in that bank. But the role he plays here is the role of Mother Earth. So you bring in this mapping, not only the traditional stakeholders, but also the voice of Mother Earth, the voice of the most marginalized groups that are not represented at the table, and the voice of the children, the voice of the future, in order to have a different kind of conversation. So in summary, if that's what we are trying to do in this century and in this decade, planetary healing and civilizational renewal, then the only way of doing that is, I believe, going to 4.0. So moving stakeholder relationships from toxic or transactional to co-creative. So that's that here. And the only way to do that is if you provide a support infrastructures for that, places and methods and tools. And that's what I call School for Transformation, or U-School for Transformation, that is focusing on democratizing the access to this kind of transformation literacy. So let me stop here. That's a little bit the background that I'm coming from, and why I thought kind of the conversation we had before really was so critical for the challenges we face. So now I need to just find out. Stop sharing. Here it is.
This presentation is actually so many questions, and very interesting presentations that we have to think from or come up with new questions from different perspectives. But let me ask you one question first. What you said, you cannot change the system unless you transform consciousness, which is mindset. Could you give us more detail about that? How to change this mindset? What kind of questions should we ask to ourselves, but not only us like individuals, but also organizations, business or governments, and how to deal with this different approaches in order to change the whole mindset?
Probably everyone who has ever been in an organization or in some kind of change management environment has made the experience. If you just change the structure, how you work together. For example, I bring in a new boss, so we cut one division into 2 or 3, then yes, that may improve some, but often the same people reenact the same problems just in a new structure if you don't change the mindset. What is the mindset? It's how we see and sense the problem, how we understand the role of others and our own role, to how it contributes to the problem. So how do we, and that's really what I think 50% of all change management boils down to, right? To move from this old mindset, just seeing the problem and the people around me, towards, this more reflective view, bending the beam of observation, that you begin to see how you're being perceived through the eyes of the others, what your impact is on the experience of others. And the only way of doing that is through listening. That's why I believe at the core of really so we see a lot of leadership failure around us, colossal leadership failure. If you double click on that, what is at the core of that? It's always the same. It's leaders and institutions disconnecting with the real reality that they're facing, right? With a changed reality that they're up against. In other words, it's a lack of listening, right? It's a disconnect. The only way to address that is to deepen our capacity to listen, and to listen to the people that are really relevant to the situation. So that's why for example, when the CEO of Ant Financial, when I talked to him, and he said, look, we have the smartest people in the world, graduates from MIT, from Stanford, and so on and so forth. They do a terrific job in our company. But so they are brilliant, right? But collectively, right, as a team at the top, we have a very low IQ. Right? It's not as high as the individual IQ. What can we do? In that case, we took one of the challenges, globalization, and they went on a listening journey, listening to all the stakeholders, including the people in the country who don't have any financial service, and just kind of empathizing with that and seeing how their own system looks like through the eyes of all these different stakeholders. And the switch, it's not complicated. It's like, so we had Louisa earlier from IDEO, right? User-centric design is using the same thing. You put yourself into the shoes of the user. And anyone who ever did that realizes that coming up with a brilliant design does not mean I need to be brilliant. It just means you need to connect with reality. You need to put yourself into the shoes of the user. You need to feel the disconnect, and then your ideas will be very precise, will be much better than what was there before. What we are doing in this co-sensing activities, like with this organization that I mentioned, is that we say, okay, the user is important, but also all the other stakeholders, including the ones that are most marginalized. Those are the ones we need to bring in. So how is it that you can change the mindset of someone, put them on a journey, put them into a situation that they think is relevant to the challenge that they face, and help them to listen, not only with an open mind, that's already difficult enough, but also with an open heart, to really sense into someone else's experience. Personally, I teach this stuff also at MIT in different contexts. I am shocked how fast you can shift your mode of listening when you have the right tools. Because you would think, well, listening, I'm a good listener or not, what can I do, right? I'm born this way. No, there's a lot we can do. And if you apply the tools and you have a little feedback group, right? So a small group who gives you honest feedback, within 4 or 5 weeks, you can profoundly shift the way you listen. And when you shift the way you listen, your experience and your relationships are shifting. And when your experience and your relationships are shifting, everything is shifting.
Well, that's quite fascinating. I'm just wondering if this theory might be suitable for individuals, but what about governments, for instance? Because especially lately, we are seeing more and more populist leaderships everywhere in the world. And so do you think that even though the system is able to change in organizations or in civil society, what about governments? Do you think that the governance is facing serious problems in in this sense?
We all know that is the case, right? so that's not. I think that's. I feel that's almost a rhetorical question, because probably everyone here in the loop would say yes to your question, and so would I. And yes, I have been applying that in government context, among others, also in Indonesia, right? But also currently with many of UN organizations, which is very much a culture of government, right? Because the United Nations is the United Nations of governments in reality today. And so it's really operating based on that culture. And when you work with governments, so for example, what we learned in Indonesia is that in all the policy making, applying listening really means that you put into place a deep listening, multi-stakeholder process before you come up with a policy. And the result was that the protesting and the riots in the country went significantly down, because people, for example, the farmers kind of in setting the food prices and so on, were listened to before and had ways of inputting into the policy-making process. So yes, I think government and governance is a fantastic example how listening and dialogue can be built into the core process, how we evolve our systems of governance to be more responsive to the communities, to be more responsive also smaller parts of the communities that are excluded right now. The exclusion problem, the problem of institutional racism that we have so rampant here in the United States, but it's also undercover in many other countries. How do you address that? Well, it all has to do with listening and with being more intentional in listening to not only whoever shows up, kind of those organizations that have the most powerful lobbying groups, but really being intentional in to be more inclusive in your process of listening. And yes, that's a lot what can be done there. And if it is applied, it can make a big difference, and it does.
By the way, we are supposed to get some questions also from audience. I don't know if we will be able to do that because I can't see any, but maybe our moderators might, if they can just send me some questions coming from the audience, that will be great. Back to Otto. Basically, what you are saying is listening is not enough as such. You also have to have the right tools. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, Otto?
Well, basically, I would say today, when you go around, and I think it's probably also true for our group that's coming together in this moment here, most people today say, yes, I know society, our whole economy and our whole civilization, it's unsustainable. It's hitting in the wrong direction. It's hitting the wall, right? It's not sustainable. Personally, number one, I want to be part of a different story. I know kind of we need to create something different, right? A different, more inclusive, more sustainable economy and regenerative, but I don't know how. So I think that is a very widely shared sense, those three things. We are moving in the wrong direction. We are hitting the wall. I want to be part of a different story, but I don't know how. And I think on the how side of things, what's missing today, everyone knows in this decade, so we are in a decade of transformation, right? Where in order to meet the Paris Agreement, in order to address the climate and the biodiversity and the inequity crisis that we are facing, we need to transform our systems within the next few years in very significant ways. What we don't have, and there's by and large agreement on that, what we don't have is transformation literacy, kind of the capacity to actually make that work, the capacity to move to the 4.0 into working in a more co-creative way. And I think what's missing there mostly is, and it's reflected in our institutions of higher education, right? If you look at universities, what's the blind spot of higher ed and of education? Transformation literacy. We know everything about the what. We don't know about the how to make this work. So on the SDGs, we know what we should be doing, but we are not doing it, right? There is a knowing doing gap really on the level of the collective right now. And from a systems perspective, the only way to address a disconnect between the head and the hand is to activate the intelligence of the heart. That's kind of what the earlier panel was touching into a little bit. It has to do with how do we build community? How do we build resonance? So how do I engage in stakeholder relationship with people with whom I disagree, with people who have a different ideology and material interest than I have? But can I empathize with them? Can I develop with them a relationship that could be co-created? creative. I think that's really the challenge. And much of organizing today is organizing with people who share the same ideology with you, right? AKA Facebook algorithm. Well, that's a dead end. We need to learn how to organize and connect with people with whom we disagree. We need to learn how to organize around the commons that we need to regenerate in our communities. About on a city level, right? How do we kind of create a more regenerative city that is more inclusive for all communities in our ecosystem? So we need to really understand how we can be effective ecosystem catalysts. And that's really, in part, a question of methods and tools. So the methods and tools of deep listening, the methods of tools of bringing these diverse stakeholder groups together and basically taking them on a journey. So it can be done, but it requires these, I would call them, social leadership technologies. It is doable. It is done on a small level scale. Just we need a lot more of that. And most people don't understand this. What does it mean to activate the intelligence of the heart, which is how to shift the relationship between me and other people in the system with whom I may not agree on a number of things. We need to shift our relationship to really change how the overall system is operating.
That you mentioned for health, finance, organizations, or teaching, learning. Do you think that you have to update this 4.0 to one level up after pandemic? Post-pandemic era will require even more, like 5.0 or 4.5. What do you think?
So I'm not sure. I think the problem today is, so whether we call it 4.0 or 5.0, the problem today is not that we can't spell out what the difference is between 4.0 and 5.0, which we could. The problem is we are stuck in 2.0. That's the problem. 2 and 3.0. So I think what the pandemic showed us is anything is possible. It also showed we can change our system in an instant. We can mobilize unimaginable resources when we just make it a priority. As human beings, many people say, ants and, they are organized by a much higher collective intelligence, right? And look at us humans. But I think the human species, we are the only ones who can change, who can connect intentionally to our future and change the way we operate. No one else can do that. So, and we did that to some degree in the pandemic, right? If we put our mind on something, we can bend the curve. We can change within weeks the rules of our collective behavior. So I think that's an enormous encouragement, right? So that we saw anything is possible if we just put our mind on it. The problem is we don't do that with the right with the longer term challenges, like the planetary emergency we are now part of, like inequity and so forth. But I think that's the work of this decade. It is possible. And many people have seen that profound change is possible, that also in organizations, right? Okay, everyone is working from home. Suddenly, a lot more change is possible than you might have thought before. So a lot of things that look rigid, like more than a year ago, are much more fluid now. And we know that there's a lot more change possible. We just need to put our mind on that. And we need to have quality holding spaces for convening stakeholders and really going through this outer and inner journey of kind of understanding our systems through all the different. So what does it mean? The Sangha, the next Buddha may be a Sangha. It means it cannot be one person. The Sangha is a community where different perspectives come together. It means in systems thinking that we need to come together and we need to listen to each other's perspectives, and through that listening, and facilitator speak, a collective container, right, which is a holding space is being built that allows us to make sense together and to act together moving forward. And that's really what's being done in many places. That's the new role of institutions. That's exactly a process we now do with 14 different countries in the UN system, right? The UN has 30 different single organizations organizations, right, that are all working in silos. How do you make them work together to serve the needs of the countries? So it is happening. It's happening in many places. It just, when you look at the agenda of this decade of transformation, it just needs a lot more attention. But I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing. And we know from change, right? What is true for all change in nature? When we look into nature, well, all change starts very small. It's the seeds, but the seeds are where the future is already present today. And I think many of these seeds are really probably in this community, and the seeds may be in what you feel you want to make happen right now, right? And that's really, I think, what probably brings many of us together in this loop here.
Well, Otto, so many questions, of course, we might discuss, but unfortunately we have 2 minutes left. I have 2 questions from the audience, so please allow me to ask you those questions in order to include our audience, our guests as well. So one question is, how do you think strategy making process can be democratized to not leave the fate of communities to particular group while designing next system of the world? And the second one is, how do we change that when business principles are rooted in profit maximization?
Well, I mean, both questions probably need half a day, not a minute each. But I think on the so how to democratize strategy, I think that all has to do with clarifying the intention, right? And to be more inclusive in involving different key stakeholders of a system. So early on. So I always think in terms of, if you want to ask yourself, okay, but who are the stakeholders? Because you can't work with everyone, right? Who are the stakeholders? A good organizing question is, who are the people that we need to bring together that need each other in order to change the system? So if you ask yourself, okay, what is the system you want to change? And then to change that system, who would be the people that need each other in order to change the system? I think that's a good organizing question of who to bring together in such a strategy core team. And then that the democratization is really, I would say, not only the inclusiveness of involving different people, but also is kind of the mode of conversation and listening, right? Not just engage in debate, but also in dialogue and deep listening. I think those would be things that come to my mind. And on the economy, yeah, I think we are moving beyond profit only. I think what we will see is a bifurcation of business. We'll see, I mean, many people like to say, well, only if you do all the SDGs and are an ethical organization, you are profitable, and otherwise you are not. I don't think that's true. We see highly profitable organizations that are very unethical, and we see ethical organizations that are highly profitable. So it's both. So what the reality is that we will see a much more clearer differentiation between one type of business organizations that are purely profit driven, basically profit machines, another breed of organizations and businesses that are mission driven, that are much, so yes, they have like their profit as well, of course. Profit is like oxygen. We need it, right, to operate. That's not the ultimate purpose, right? The purpose is impact. It's kind of serving the larger community, being relevant to the SDGs that we talked about. And I think that will be more clear. And so when I can just judge by the students I have at MIT and young people I meet in other places, there may be a confirmation bias, yes, but I would say from the young people and also many mid-career people, everyone is looking for the same thing. It's like a good organization. I mean, everyone wants to be part of a story you don't need to be embarrassed by because it's doing harm to the community. Everyone wants to be part of a story that you can feel good about when you share it to your kids, when you share it with your friends and family. Yet, if you are really real about that, it's hard to find. Right? So I want to be part of that. But so we are in a moment where many people are looking for more mission-driven enterprises, but there are not that many around, which is really interesting. And I believe in this decade, we'll see the rise of a breed. So part of the business world will make a much more clear commitment there. In other parts of the business world will be more illiterate, right? In terms of their social and environmental impact. And that process is already underway. So that's what I would say. Essentially, we need to, in order to really address the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, we need a different framework on which our economy is based, that where also the public choices we do, for example, when you think about agriculture, right? So today I buy organic food, but still all the subsidies are moving in the wrong direction, right? Including from, much of the EU subsidies, right? Or the US subsidies. So why are we with $1 trillion subsidizing the wrong farming model? So there's like a public choice aspect where people's participation in decision making needs to be upgraded, because most people, if you ask them, are opting for a more regenerative economy that's more inclusive. And we just have not realize that education in the structures and the systems that we operate today. And that's basically the journey of this decade.
Well, unfortunately, very unfortunately, we have to stop at this point because our time is over. But, thank you very much, Professor Sharma. Really, really important points. And I love one sentence from your presentations that I want to share is, who I am today, who I could be tomorrow is the key questions, I guess. So I don't have that much time to summarize our session, but for our participants and for the audience, you can always go to YouTube and you can check Professor Otto Sharma's presentations, and really important presentations, actually very important points that we really discuss, and we have to ask to ourselves important questions. Thank you very much again for joining me and for joining the summit. I hope to see you another time.
So do I. Thank you so much.